Ce soir, je te suis jusqu'à l'infini. 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 Ce soir,
Snooze, bro.
je te suis jusqu'à l'infini. Ce soir, je te suis jusqu'à l'infini.
Patrick's face. Absolute terror.
Ce soir, je te suis.
Welcome to Seminar 14 of Grace in Thought, the grand finale of our consideration of Michel Foucault's 1973 to 1974 lectures at the Collège de France, Psychiatric Power. The last two lectures of Psychiatric Power will be the topic of discussion today. This is not the last seminar of the first season. We have some tricks up our sleeves. Some tricks beginning with the beginning of this seminar that we call the clinic of the unsaid, unspoken, and unheard. Please take a seat. There is a selection of sun-yellowed magazines on the jolted coffee table before you, and chilled water is available from the cooler to your right. Caffeine is not advised lest it cause a dangerous excitation. We ask that you are respectful of your fellow patients. Here in the waiting room, you might hear screams of pain, joy, exultation, or sexual fulmination. Do not worry. The doctors are here for you. If you have any feelings of discomfort, please speak gently to the receptionist. Do not raise your voice. Do not make any lustful overtures. Do not disturb the order that has been established here, for that is the responsibility of the doctors for whom you wait. Greats in thought. Read, riff, rapscalionate in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Greats in thought.
All right. So today we are considering chapter or lecture rather 11 and 12 in Michel Foucault's Psychiatric Power. And
a bit of gain, Jakob.
again,
Yeah.
hello.
I'll manage the mute club if you get the
You've retreated
the
to a
input
kind of
club
like
in the house.
caverny distance.
Fucking hell. Anyway, we have tests of reality and madness, questioning, drugs, and hypnosis. This is the first part of our script today, and then we will move on to simulation and resistance. In these two, we will become doctors and patients, mad and real, found in the archives and constructed in the dreams of Michel Foucault. All right, let us begin. Psychiatric reality testing, phase 1, questioning.
With what you are, with your life, with the grounds for people's complaints, with what you are, with what you do, and what you say, provide me with some symptoms so that I know what your illness is. Not so that I know what your illness is, but so that I can stand before you as a doctor.
Well, here we are. You are here either of your own free will or at the behest of someone else. But you have come here because people are uneasy and complain about you. You say certain things. You have done certain things. You behave in a certain way. I am not in any way questioning you about the truth of these facts. And I do not want you to know the truth or falsity of the reproaches made against you, or even of the malaise you feel. I am not an investigating magistrate. However, I am prepared to relieve you of legal or moral responsibility for what you have done, or for what happens to you, or for the feelings you experience, on the one condition that you subjectively accept the reality of all this, on condition that you give all these facts back to me as subjective symptoms of your existence, of your consciousness. I want to find all these elements again in your accounts and confessions. More or less transformed, no matter, as elements of your suffering, as the force of a monstrous desire, as the signs of an irreprehensible impulse. In short, as symptoms. I really want to remove the weight of your legal and moral responsibility from the reasons for you being here. But I will only perform this subtraction. I will only lift these reasons from your head on a condition, precisely that you give them to me in one form or another as symptoms. Then I will remove the fault.
Really, I am someone for whom the psychiatric hospital was built. I am someone for whom a doctor was needed. I am sick, and since I'm sick, it is clear to you, whose major function is to confine me, that you are a doctor.
I will free you from your madness on condition that you confess to me your madness. Give me the reasons why I confine you. Really give me the reasons why I deprive you of your freedom. And at that point, I will free you from your madness. The action by which you will be cured of your madness is also that by which I will assure myself that what I do really is a medical act.
I will pass through the entire asylum machinery. I will see all the mechanisms of the disciplinary system in order to transform them, simply by my presence, into a therapeutic apparatus. Give me some symptoms. Make some symptoms from your life for me, and you will make me a doctor.
Oh, nice.
So what do the doctors think?
Shall I read my bit then?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. All right, here's the first one. Whatever problems you have, whatever difficulties you've met with in life, come to me. Come to me, and I will give them a name the name of madness. Whatever mistakes you've made or misery you've caused, merely knock upon my door and I will let you in. Sit down upon my couch and talk. Talk until you've slaked your thirst for speech. Talk until you're sick of your own voice. And I will hold up the mirror of madness and show you your face. I will be the mirror to your madness. You will see who you are. You will see how happy you could be. Come to me. Confess. Confess until you're blue in the face, and I will christen you again. I will christen you madness. Your name will be the same as my name, your pain, my pain. Then we can live together under one roof. We can live together like a family. You will walk along the corridors and across the halls, into different rooms, out into the gardens, these corridors that are my limbs and bones, these gardens that are my flesh and my hair, my corridors, my rooms, my gardens. Come to me, and they will also be yours. By walking round them, you will exist, and you will make me exist. When you run down the corridors of your madness, you will be close to me, and you will cheer my soul. When you climb the stairs of your insanity and race back down again, you will be like a heart in my own chest. When you sing in the gardens of your madness, I will hear it as the singing in my own blood. You will blush when I am angry. When I am sad, you will go cold. When I am absent, the lights will go out, and in the darkness you will sit like a shivering little boy with the covers over your head. What could be more beautiful than this? What could be more homely? The world is full of errors and mistakes. Here, everything is perfect. In the world, chaos reigns, but this is a place of cleanliness and order. Shatter yourself into symptoms, and I will rescue you. I will gather up the treasure of your madness. Every gem and every jewel of it will be precious to me. Cut yourself and bleed out your madness. Let your madness rush like oil from the ground. We will be rich. My heart will beat the blood around your veins. My methods will churn the madness from your depths. The world is out of tune, but here everything runs like clockwork. Everything is musical. The staff run like clockwork. So do the machines. My methods run like clockwork, and soon you will run like clockwork too, as happy as the hour hand on its euphoric, inertial course. Know my name. Call me madness. Say the word, and I will let you live.
Jakob, do you mind if I make a little reading from the text here? So you can see that the individual's will can be captured at the level of his real behavior, at the level rather of the clinical observation of his behavior. Consequently, if it is true that, on the one hand, the game of instruction typical of the neurological examination makes the possibility of examination depend on the patient's will to a certain extent, on the other hand, with clinical observation, with the clinical decipherment now available, the patient can be circumvented and short-circuited. To summarize this in a few words, let's say that a new clinical medical apparatus is put in place that is different in its nature, equipment, and effects from what we can call the Bichat, Laennec clinical apparatus, as well as from the psychiatric apparatus. In organic medicine, the patient was given a minimum of injunctions like lie down, cough, and the rest was given over entirely to the doctor's examination, carried out through the interplay of stimuli and effects. I have tried to show you that the essential component of capture in psychiatry was questioning, which is the substitute for the examination techniques of organic medicine. Questioning depends, of course, on the subject's will. And for the psychiatrist, the answers are not a test of truth nor the possibility of a differential decipherment of the disease, but merely a test of reality. Questioning simply corresponds to the question, is he mad?
I think I've got another. My other one goes here actually as well.
Well, then go.
All right, this is going to be shit because I can't act. But symptoms, get your symptoms. Roll up, don't be shy. We sell real and fake, used and abused, black and white and technicolor. Symptoms for the daytime and symptoms for the night. Symptoms for sympathy and symptoms for spite. It's all on sale, ladies and gents. This world needs madmen. Symptoms are essential for anyone who wants madness in this day and age. A man without symptoms is invisible. A man without symptoms is like a man without thumbs. He doesn't know how to grasp the world. Nobody sees him. Ah, little girl, I see you're interested in our historical stock. Yes, we also sell signs, precursors, and forerunners of illness. All kinds of dodgy and unusual behavior to flesh out your hospital profiles. Our stock of abnormalities, ladies and gents, is second to none. We'll edit your childhood from inside out. We'll doctor your past and give it back brand new. We'll make you a pretty little photo album. You at 3 with gleaming eyes and gleaming knives, chopping off the heads of cabbages. You as exact as an anatomist, crucifying frogs. You doing favors for Uncle Jim. No, not quite your style, not quite your thing. We also sell hereditary diseases at cheaper prices than anywhere else on the market. A grandfather with Asperger's, a great aunt who flushed her child down the loo, a father who played fast and loose with his pancreas and other organs, a mother who went to bits. We've got them all here, the whole circus of them out upon the table, looking for a new home, all purified and isolated, in vials that will fit into the palm of your hand. And if you don't want any of these, if you're still unsure, perhaps what you want is our other service, our bespoke operation, our tailored device, something for people who like to put a bit of themselves into their madness. Yes, my friends, we will look into your heart and find the madness there. I'll listen with a stethoscope and I'll hear the little bastards scuttling about. I'll drop my straw into your being and I'll suck up the waters. Give me the man, I say, and I'll give you the madness. I will go down into your depths, further down than even the light will dare to go, and there I will fish up the sea creatures of your madness, those monsters of the psyche that you've never dared to see before. And they'll be your sea creatures, my friend, your monsters. They'll be you. All right.
Do you mind if I just make a small response from the reading?
Yeah, go on.
Page 313, 6th of February, 1974. However, precisely to the extent that society was obliged to divide up, control and supervise health, and to ensure against accidents and illnesses, in order to extract maximum profit from bodies. At the point when these techniques were established, and by the same process, illness became something profitable for the person who was ill. In the 18th century, the only profit a patient receiving aid could draw from his illness was to stay a bit longer in hospital. And this minor problem is frequently encountered in the history of hospital institutions in the 18th century. With the tight control of dating from the 19th century, and with this general cover of the phenomena of illness by both medicine and insurance, illness itself, as such, can become a source of profit for the subject, or at any rate, a way of benefiting from this general system. Illness becomes profitable when it raises a problem at the general level of the profits of society. Illness is consequently intertwined with the whole economic problem of profit.
Nice. Very delicately done.
Accidentally.
My proposal is that we go through the rest of the first lecture. It will be quite brief, and then we can pause the reading and talk outside of character. How does
Cool.
that sound?
Yeah.
All
You
right.
mean like we start phase 2, yeah?
Yeah. Phase 2 and 3, and then we break for a bit.
Yeah, cool. All right. The original intellectual modification, or the primordial modification. Every form, every accident of delirium or madness, strictly speaking, fixed ideas, hallucinations, irresistibility of drives, owe their origin to an original intellectual modification, always identical to itself, which is evidently the essential condition of their existence. This is maniacal excitation. This expression is not quite right, for it is a matter of a simple and complex state of, at one and the same time, vagueness, uncertainty, oscillation, and mobility of ideas, which are often expressed in a profound incoherence. It is a disaggregation, a veritable dissolution of the intellectual composite that we call the moral faculties.
Luke?
I mean, my focus is more that the 11th lecture seems to me to be a kind of summation, before the 12th. So what I was picking up in the 11th was that he's kind of trying to bring to a close many a theme that have occupied him, because he really is. We've spoke of Lance Armstrong, the surfer, doing his stuff on the waves. This is kind of the apocalypse now of philosophy. We've got Foucault there, doing his stuff on the waves, and it's difficult for me, from my position, having made a certain kind of discovery and resolution of Foucault's thought, to comment, beyond that. I think that the 11th lecture is, for me, it's kind of like it's like a warm-up act, but at the same time, it's a warm-up act that tries to bring closure to many problems that he's encountered before. Maybe problems of the tide, problems of the wave, problems of the scenario, problems of the circumstance. To bring back the Apocalypse Now reference from before, it's it's the moment when all of Major Kilgore's troops are dying, and he's like, right, well, I've got to sort this out. because otherwise we're not going to be able to get in any surfing, which was the whole point we were here for. So he brings in the napalm strike, and then unfortunately the napalm strike changes one of the conditions, which is that of the wind. For surfing, it's very important that the wind blows in. I always get these two mixed up. Onshore, I think, is one that blows from the onshore to offshore, and that's what holds up the wave. And so, yes, I see this 11th lecture as almost like Foucault performing like a major Kilgore maneuver, but the elements that he's trying to control are like far in excess of his ability to control them. He's trying to control the wind, the weather, the boys, the enemy, the opposition. He's trying to control the history of philosophy, the archive. But really, to me, it's all a kind of a setup, and maybe that's something to remark upon. This interesting duality of the word like setup, which has a cinematic register, in terms of getting the set, or in terms of a performative register, getting the setup right, getting the setup correct. But then setup also has this other sense, this dual sense of, being set up. Like so, there's a beautiful duality there between setup and setup. In one setup, it is, it's there in order to make the thing that's going to come to be beautiful. In the other sense, it's there in order to hijack or to trick. And in some way, I think that Foucault in Lecture 11 is doing both.
I agree with what you're saying. There's one little thing that I'd add though, that weirdly when he anticipates himself, and he kind of like gets ahead of himself, he writes, like what in music is called like preludes. And weirdly enough, some of the preludes, like if you think about like Wagner or Mozart, are actually almost more famous than the operas for which they are preludes. And there are weird moments like that. Clearly, he's got Charcot in mind, what he calls Charcot's grand stagecraft in mind when he's writing a passage like this. But he never returns to such lyricism as we see here. So I'm just going to read this paragraph out, which is not to like contradict Luke, but just to say that like there are some things to be put in the net here. There are some like these kind of beautiful moments that break out from the summary, and he allows himself to enter this kind of rhapsodic state. So he says, the two rights of so this is on page 276, if anyone wants to look at it. It's like the beginning of the second or the third paragraph on that page. And he's talking about clinical presentation. The two rights of the visit and questioning are, as you can see, the elements by which the disciplinary field I have spoken about functions. You also see why this great right of questioning needs to be reinvigorated from time to time. Just as alongside low mass, there is solemn high mass, so the clinical presentation to students is to private questioning of the patient what the sung mass is to low mass. And why is it that psychiatry is thrown so soon, so quickly into this missa solemnis, into this rite of almost public presentation, of anyway the clinical presentation of patients to students? I've already said why in a couple of words, but I think you now find here the possibility of grasping a different level of the working of this clinical presentation. And it goes on, and basically he kind of maps out and reaffirms this thing that he said much earlier on, that this missa solemnis is all about confirming the psychiatrist or the neurologist in Charcot's case as master, but master at the level of like high priest, master at the level of guru, almost of demigod. And what I think is like, again, I don't want to like riff on this too much, but it's very interesting that Foucault slips into Latin here, that there's this kind of, he's not an obfuscator, he's not a Derrida. So what is he trying to do by slipping into this Latin, where it's almost like he's adopting the very kind of like notes or music of this solemn occasion in order to kind of like evoke it in us, induce the solemnity in us. And I think he does that a lot, anticipates himself and returns, but the anticipations are never the same as the thing anticipated. And the return is never really the thing that's purportedly being returned to.
Yeah, I think just to be a boring scholar for a moment, this notion of like the musical prelude is like very interesting. Firstly, because this is a prelude, you know, the way in which this work will manifest itself. Well, you know, it won't manifest itself, in fact, but it will become, in I don't know, you know, some sense, real in Discipline and Punish. And you know, he's conscious of this work being a prelude, and maybe he's also conscious of the fact that this prelude to the work that's, you know, coming to be will actually be more important than the work itself. You know, that I always use elements of this in a kind of, you know, a boring scholarly pedagogic way, as I think that, you know, if you want to get to what Foucault's notion of power is, you go to Psychiatric Power, the lectures. You know, when it arrives finally in Discipline and Punish, I've always likened it to, you know, trying to grasp sand, you know, trying to grasp a mass of sand that just slips through your fingers. Whereas here, the kind of architectonic that he describes, you know, earlier on, you know, in terms of the adjudicants and how, you know, if we go all the way back to Mad King George, and how there are these, adjudicants, I think is probably the right word. You know, they're not quite assistants because they have like this enforcement capacity, but they are like a fundamental part of what he is. Well, at least what it would seem that he's trying to get at in this moment, in this movement of his work, and it's something that I just wanted to talk about, because what we're getting towards the end here is the big, ostensibly structuralist theme, in which a certain kind of juridicial dispositif is emerging at this moment, and that is the dispositif of law, of confinement, of the prison, alongside corollary institutions such as the school, such as the workhouse. And all of these institutions exist in a certain way, you know, in a way that, you know, Patrick articulated differently but magnificently, to extract profit from the body, to turn the body, you know, to almost the kind of final robbery of enclosure in the commons, you know, to finally rob that last bit of commons, which is our shared materiality. You know, these shared questions of existence that are rendered in analytic philosophy in a kind of banal way, which come in continental philosophy, you know, a real forceful way. You know, these questions of existence. Who am I? Why do I exist? What am I here for? What's the point of life? And so, this notion of a kind of musical prelude, I think that in his lectures, he's kind of doing this because he is very conscious that these students who are listening to this, you know, they are putting their tape recorders on his lectern. You know, it speaks about this in the Nouvel Observateur article, which I think comes just after this lecture series, and it talks, you know, of the way that the students, they would like hasten, you know, to the lectern at the start of the lecture and he would be kind of, you know, surrounded, enclosed, almost ironically confined by all of these, you know, recorders. So he knew that he was being recorded, and what he recorded was, in a sense, a prelude. And what I think something important about, well, at least the sense that I have about what we're doing, is that we're excavating that, you know, and we're going back to the prelude, and we're giving life and verve and vivacity to the prelude. And we're not focusing on, you know, the major works, the famous works, you know, we're not starting with not even L'Histoire de Folie, because that wasn't really published. It was published in a bridge form called Madness in Civilization. But, you know, we're not starting there. And we're not starting with les mots et les choses, the order of things. We're not starting with the archaeology of knowledge. We're not starting with the birth of the clinic. Kind of in an important sense, we're starting with something that's a prelude. And I think that Jakob, I think you should come in here, because this kind of script and thing that you've written is in an important sense, a prelude for what we're doing. And so, so I'd like to hear, a bit about that, to just attach, having made the boring kind of scholarly points. Just the last one is just about the coupling, and it's this coupling, this structuralist coupling between juridicial reason and madness. Now he mentions this a few times in this text, in which he talks about psychiatric power latching precisely onto intention. Now, in order for this juridicial function to have effect, well, it has to have like an object or a target. It has to have something that it latches onto, grasps onto, that becomes its object and its material. That object becomes intention. And so, at a later time, specifically in Discipline and Punish, we will see how important this becomes for Foucault. And I think this is the kind of, analytic philosophers just dismiss him entirely. But within the continental philosophical tradition, I think we can go to kind of, Lévi-Strauss and structuralism and say, okay, well, if there is to be this puritanical thing called intention, if there is to be this thing that juridical reason can latch onto, can deliberate over, well, there must be its opposite. There must be its other. And that other will be madness.
Well, quickly on the format.
Should we finish this script though? Yeah.
Yeah. We can
read that. But I understand why Luke kind of like used that as a launch pad, because the bit that I read really was this moment of like the Foucault getting swept into a kind of vortex of thought. The amount of parentheses in that little passage that I wrote. It's almost like the mind kind of reeling, the mind going into vertigo.
Let's finish the script and then I can go in with some things I was thinking about, or
Great.
I had with 11, because it's also kind of slightly different track. Luke, this is you kind of reconnecting to Patrick's passage in the reality testing phase 2 drugs.
Luke, it's you, man.
No, it starts with Patrick on my document.
But I already read that.
Psychiatric reality testing phase 2.
I read that bit, didn't I?
Patrick already read that.
I read that bit just before you spoke.
Wow, I'm going to riff slightly, but as Foucault would have liked. Well, as a doctor, I know the law of your madness. I recognize it precisely because I can reconstitute it in myself. Under the condition of modifications like hashish intoxication, I can follow and reconstitute the typical thread of events and processes of madness in myself. I can understand what happens. I can grasp and reconstitute the authentic and autonomous movement of your madness, and consequently, I can grasp it from within. I can well understand what madness is, because I can dream. With my dream, and with what I can grasp of my dream, I will end up understanding what is going on in someone who is mad.
So we will move on to phase 3, hypnosis.
Yeah. I'm wondering if my other thing goes here, but we'll just leave it for a sec. One thing is, I feel like there's a mistake here. It says Patrick Doctor, but then I'm Doc, and then Pat.
You go first. Luke is the patient.
Okay, all right. Who put you to sleep?
It was you,
Why did you vomit yesterday?
because they gave me cold bouillon
At what time did you vomit?
at 4 o'clock.
Did you eat afterwards?
Oui, monsieur. And I didn't vomit what I had eaten.
What accident was it that made you ill for the first time?
Because I was cold.
Was it a long time ago?
1 year ago.
Didn't you have a fall?
Oui, monsieur.
In this fall, did you fall upon your stomach?
No. I fell backwards. What made me ill was that I fell into the water. And you want to cure me too. So you must throw me in the water.
All right. So just to summarize, I mean,
Well,
what we have,
Jacob, you're just dark now. Oh, there you go. Okay.
all right. So what we have just read, right, is like excerpts of citations from the archive, which Foucault cites, but then they're also mixed with his own kind of imitations or kind of suggestions or yeah, whatever, like of doctors or his patients, really. And they cover the phases of questioning, the use of drugs, and then the use of hypnosis. And about the format, I mean, well, we will see what it is. I just thought, you know, like on a basic level, I think there's something kind of shopping out Foucault into an archive and fucking with him and kind of, you know, inserting his own interpretations of the voice of the doctor, of the patients, of the hysterics. Just materially for me, like artistically in a sense, it seems like it's kind of there, you know, like it's why not do it? And I don't know where it leads to, but I think he so forcefully, like, does he include his own interpretations, and he mimics all these voices like from time and time again. That I don't know. I think it's interesting. There is something in it, and I don't know what it is yet, but we'll see where we go. And I think on some other tracks, I was like, one question that I had, and we can maybe see if this fits in or we just leave it. But I was like, what the fuck is this hypnosis thing? And like, what do they actually do with the magnetism, with all these magnets, and what fuck not they were doing? That's just a question. I mean, because he doesn't really go into that, and I thought that was interesting. And then, to me, I mean, coming from my kind of skewed angle, there was something in his kind of, as Luke was saying, how he, you know, like in the sense of a summary here in chapter 11, where he kind of picks up different threads that we've kind of heard before, but he renews them and fills them out. The hashish, the use of hashish, for example, and hypnosis and magnetism he has mentioned before, and he doesn't really expand on it that much here. But I thought about this passage quite in the beginning, where we're on page 267, where he talks about the medical crisis, and he says, like, so I think we can say that the liquidation of the medical crisis was acceptable to medicine thanks to pathological anatomy, but was not possible in the psychiatric domain due to the absolute diagnosis and the absence of the body. The problem psychiatry faces becomes precisely that of constituting, of establishing the kind of test or series of tests that will enable it to meet its requirement of absolute diagnosis. That is to say, the kind of test that will accord reality with or unreality to what is taken to be madness, to inscribe it within the field of reality, or to disqualify it as unreal. And there was just something that made me think, at least, about like the kind of medical crisis here, and he returns to this, right, where he, as I understand it, used the word crise in French for the hysterical attacks. And just briefly, I'm thinking here of like how much kind of the medical crisis, in a sense, is maybe not in the medical language, but in some kind of nature, it seems very much like embedded in psychiatry, in this way that in later like psychoanalytical, psychodynamic, I mean, all the kind of psychotherapeutic or psychiatric therapies that aren't like purely like bio-based and well, material in a sense. I think there is this element of crisis that is, you know, like where you're encouraging the crisis to unfold, right? I mean, whether it's like anxiety, depression, kinds of psychosis, or again, you know, like there are many differentiations to be made if it's social, bio-based, and so on. But there is like fundamentally a sense, I think, in which you have to play with the crisis of a person. You have to let the person unfold their problem, and you have to, through their own crisis, kind of come to terms with what is going on, right? So someone shows up at a clinic or in a therapeutic setting or in the kind of emergency room, and I think, I mean, many different treatments again, but throughout a long period, I think to successfully kind of treat that without using drugs or without only using drugs, we have to kind of work with this crisis. And just something I thought about. Well, there are some other things, but yeah, that's what I have to say for now.
And what do you think about this stuff, like about like almost we didn't talk about in that first lecture, is that guy Unspoken de Tour. So this idea of trying to get almost like behind the wheel of madness, you know, trying almost like to get within the skin of madness, impersonating madness, so as to, like, you know, become an expert in it from the inside, in and through a kind of like phenomenological experience. And then, of course, so like a kind of method psychiatry, you know. I think you said that the other day, didn't you, Jakob? You said that. I have like a weird memory that you said that. I don't know if it's true. And I tried to look it up, and apparently, I don't know, I didn't get any results from just like a really cursory search. But anyway, that's kind of the thing that's being proposed here. But at the same time, there's a sense of, anyway, in Foucault's language, of a kind of fraudulence here in that method psychiatry. So how do you think that relates to what you've just said? Like, you know, this idea of taking up the madness that's in front of you, you know, and being able almost to take it for a spin. I don't know, take it for a ride.
I don't know. I mean, the funny thing is that the immediate thing that comes to me is from Derrida, actually, when he starts this. I can't remember the text.
I'm getting mad echoes, by the way. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I can hear them as well. Don't know from where they're coming though.
It sounds all right on my end.
Okay, all right.
Well, I hear them as well. No, but this idea, like that you have to speak the language of the patient, right? This that Derrida takes up, that is, I mean, in some degree, fundamental to psychoanalysis, right? Part of psychoanalysis, it develops after Freud. I can't say I'm an expert at it, but this would be part of what you're saying, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I just like I just see this link between. So what Foucault says about that guy Moreau de Tours, like, he's kind of a fan of him, and he does this classic Foucault way, massively exaggerates his importance, you know, as a kind of like way of kicking Freud in the shins. Like the sort of the center of modern psychology is this completely unknown guy that I've dug out from some corner of the archives. You know, whether it's true or not, I don't know. Like, yeah. But this thing on hashish does sound interesting. But part of his idea is that, you know, it's a bit like, you know, in Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, when he goes to the convention for, you know, the police attorneys convention for drugs and crime, or whatever it is. And there's this guy, the keynote speaker, who's obviously being paid, like, you know, ridiculous amounts to come and like expatiate on the subject of drugs there. actually, is about 10 years behind the times, and he's just kind of rehashing and regurgitating old wisdom. But nonetheless, amongst this crowd of kind of, bores and bozos who, don't know the difference between whatever, acid and their own elbows, he can personify and impersonate the expert. Now, I don't think that's quite what's happening here, but you see, I went into the jungle of madness. I've seen the animals in there. I've seen the strange species. I've seen the flora and fauna, and I can tell you what it is. And so then this kind of functions as a form of authority that allows him to map madness. Now that there's that move, but then there's also this idea that in and through taking drugs, the sequence of like events that occur to someone who's taking hashish mirror and kind of run alongside the sequence of events that occur to someone who's making that free fall into madness. So there's this weird attempt again. So not only, again, this is what I was thinking, this is what I was trying to write something on, that Moreau de Tours, he has this weird underground link with the hysterics, okay? Because they're both like virtuosos of madness, okay? And what their expertise in madness or their function within the asylum is fundamentally related to their ability to mimic madness or go like incognito or undercover into madness. And like, I just thought there's this story that you could tell of, Moreau de Tours going into this other place, this foreign land of madness, and coming back a hysteric, and seeing the hysterics. Think about the hysterics, they're all women and stuff, like they're kind of like the modern oracles. They're like the modern sibyls, You go to them for this kind of weird, cryptic, enigmatic wisdom, but that is effective, in that kind of anthropological sense, it produces a kind of truth. Yeah. Maybe I'll read that one a bit later.
I know. So I was just going to introduce like a whole bunch of things. I think, and this is something that we talk about a lot, and Patrick's talked about it in the sense that a lot of the seductive quality of Foucault's works, of these kind of psychoanalytic works in the Anglo-Saxon world, is that they don't have the tenor and tone of to use someone who's part of the zeitgeist at the moment, Gabor Mate, right? Who has this very kind of, hey, I'm this like really nice Canadian guy, and I'm here, and and then but there's also, because I've got kind of into his work on trauma recently, and there's something like dark and cynical about what he's doing, right? Because on the one hand, he has this, I'm this Canadian guy, and I've been a practitioner in the hospital, and then he kind of like zaps people. It's almost like he has like a fucking crossbow in his back pocket, and he's just ready to go, and he's just waiting for the moment when he can like fire off this kind of like rocket, and he does this over and over again at least in the video representations that I've seen of his practice, where he has this kind of like very soft thing, but then all of a sudden, like almost out of nowhere, it comes, that's your trauma, that's your trauma right there. And there's something kind of like dark and cynical about this. And then there's also, it's why I'm artistically so interested in the
What do you think is dark and cynical? Fixing someone to their trauma?
Impaling
them on that trauma, or just the idea that I can say, I get to name the moment where the trauma arises? Or is it just the trick of having it in the back pocket? Okay, yeah.
I mean, no, I think it's all of the things at once. I think it's I mean, maybe we could look at some Gabor Mate and look how it works. But there is this thing like over and over again in various videos, and then the cynicism of like the body of profit. It's like, okay, all right, so I want to learn a bit more about like Mate and his practice and his work on trauma. And then it always directs you to these kind of like labyrinthine websites where in the end it's like, oh, it's just $125, for the course. Like he kind of like ends up having. Sorry, Jakob.
His course, or whose course do you end up with?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's Gabor Mate's courses, in like various ways. So they might be for, psychologists, psychoanalysts. Let's just call it psychiatrists, psychotherapeutic professionals, and it's always this opening of, and I've made this thing, and I'm so like happy to share it and to give it away, and then there comes, the money shot, which is, give me $125. And there's to me there's some kind of homology there with his actual practice, because he's always, he always has, at least for me, this kind of sense of like, this authority, this this kind of Zeus-like character. It's like, I will have the cure for your madness. You only have to unleaven to me.
Yeah. No, to me, it's a scam. It's a con.
Your greatest secrets, and then he moves in, and it isn't like and it's the subtlety of it itself. But you have to have like a certain pitch to hear it. It's this movement where the patient, or let's just say the individual who is talking to them about like childhood or about this or about that, and he's speaking in this way, and he's eliciting, he's very seductive in the way that he brings forth these testimonies, these confessions from people. And then there's a kind of a movement that, at least in speed and pacing, you can hear very, very clearly, if you can't hear the pitch, where he goes, and that's your trauma, and that's your trauma. And then he provides this like, explanation. And like I say, like, to me, it's like fucking, it's like a cum shot, there's something weird about this. And then there was a video of him recently speaking like at an event about Palestine. And it was quite interesting to see him like lose control of himself, right? Like lose control of this hypnotic, to speak of like hypnosis as Foucault does, right? So he's speaking as one of the world's most regarded trauma therapists. And so of course, he has the attention of this whole audience who are giving over their hearts, their bodies, their souls to him, and they're giving him their confessions. And it's like they're just waiting for this moment when the fucking, the bolt of lightning comes, and then it's all right. And then, just from the artwork together, Jakob, and then I was thinking about the Louis Theroux, where he one of the first Weird Weekends, where he goes with the guy who's like, I'm going to make you a millionaire, like one of these guys. They're kind of like have fallen a bit out of vogue, but they seem to come in and out like the tide of popularity. There are moments when this tide comes in of these very kind of sales like videos. I'm going to make you a millionaire. I'm going to solve your problems. I'm going to do this. They seem to have died away a little bit. I don't know whether or not that's a kind of a algorithmic thing on my behalf. Maybe YouTube has worked out that it isn't making any money from me sending me these videos, but there does seem to me to be a kind of tide-like motion of these con artists who turn up, and in this moment when he's talking about Palestine, so he's a Canadian Israeli, his parents were in the ghetto, and he kind of like loses his shit for a second, not in a not in this kind of way, but just he loses the control of his metric, of his rhythm, of his of this kind of bass of, hey, well, tell me some more about that, and and da da da. Well, there's your trauma. He loses this kind of almost like hypnotic, somnambulistic motion, and he becomes quite annoyed at one of the speakers, and then he returns to this kind of like patter, and this patter is not of the form that Hattrick represented it, which was beautiful in its parody, but at the same time, I don't think that is the dangerous form of hypnosis that we now suffer, from a general level. I think it's this kind of this, like I say, somnambulistic bro talk kind of motion, and there, yeah,
well, that guy John Deloney,
It's just
Knowing.
to finish. It's no, don't know. It's just a really kind of interesting moment where this guy who over and over again. So here are the accusations that that I level against Gabor Mate in his work. Number one is that he just seems to have a different kind of chicanery and con artistry and trickery. And how I see that is the repetition of the same moment over and over again. It's like the confession, and then he comes in with the lightning bolt of Zeus. Boom, there's your trauma. Now that to me is already like, that makes me suspicious that he's performing this same maneuver, over and over again, with a whole diversity of people, right? So so he isn't kind of what you two were talking about, right? He isn't playing with these people's madness. He isn't being, in my view, he's not being sincere because he's not responding to them individually. It's like he has like this mode, and that's how he does, and he does this, but then always, and then it's like the same with his work. It's like, bro, like, you've sold millions of books. You are a guy who can afford to give this shit out for free. If you really think this is helping people, if you really believe in this method, why aren't you giving it out for free? Why? And then again, why is it this kind of like labyrinthine seduction into this, lightning bolt moment where it's, oh, and now it's $125, and there's I don't know, something that artistically I'm more interested in, like disappointment and regret and like sadness and frustration than excitation. And there's something about the way that like he speaks and the way that and it's different to the characters in them, who are much more like this. But there's something going on with Bro Talk podcasts, and like I said, like I think there is a cynicism to what Gabor Mate is doing, and I think you can see it in those three things. You can see it in the way that he repeats these videos over and over again of his practice, in which it always follows this kind of same thing, and it's like zap, there's your trauma, zap, and I mean, really, to kind of witness it, to see the faces of the people, they're like, oh wow, oh, of course, thank the Lord, thank Jesus Christ. You can almost see them like prostrating at his knees before him, ready for the series of sessions that they're going to have to pay for afterwards. There's a similar thing going on in his online courses, which is like, dude, you're a New York Times best-selling author. Like, man doesn't need any money. Man doesn't need $125, $250 for his, Get Help course. And then the third,
no, but just so we don't end up speaking entirely about Gabor Mate, but I just wanted to like give some kind of interpretation, even though I don't know him. But then we can move on, maybe. Well, I don't know what you think, Patrick. But
abuse him first, know him later.
Yeah, right. Let me go for a bit of abuse. No, but not only abuse, but I can see, like, I mean, having grown up, like with two kind of psychodynamic therapists, right? So this is kind of what I think Gabor Mate is, right? He is in the American tradition of psychodynamic therapy, right? So he's not a Lacanian, he's not a Freudian, Of course, he stands on their shoulders. Well, not so much Lacan. I would very much doubt that, but I really think a lot of these, like as a therapist and as the kind of person that he is. I mean, Luke, again, there's this kind of clinical tone that you're talking about, which is calm, like soothing, kind of the patient voice, right? But then, of course, like it's like a kind of masochistic profession. You end up always just being in that position, and then now he has kind of taken on this like American style activist, violent, almost responsible social media therapist in a way, right? Where he, of course, like has to kind of, I think there's this wish, I think, for a lot of therapists in this way, or psychotherapists, to leave the clinic in a way and to go out into the world and to speak to people. And I think this kind of where he does this like I don't know what to call it, thunderbolt, revelatory moment. I think that's his American style. It's we're not doing Lacanian therapy here. We're we're in kind of American psychodynamic, ego psychology, something. But this is without knowing him very well. But I would also just say I don't think he is one of the most well-regarded trauma therapists. I think he's just the most well-known. I mean, apart from the guy who wrote what was it called? The Body Keeps Your Score, or whatever the fuck it's called.
But then he's so famous and popular that he becomes a kind of, zeitgeist object, an anthropological object. And you have to think, in what does his appeal and seductiveness consist? And definitely the aesthetics and kind of, how should I put it, phonetic of voice that Luke's kind of like, analysed play a huge role. But they, I'm not going to talk very long, but it's also, it goes with his whole, philosophical, how should I put it, but like a demeanor or philosophy, a demeanor that a theory that evinces itself as demeanor, which is, his like stick is all about compassion, all about listening. So he's one of these guys that like obviously constructs his speeches very well, such that he always chooses his enemy. So like Jordan Peterson, for some reason, is like someone he often refers to at crucial junctures in a speech. Jordan Peterson is the man who represents repression, and Gabor Mate is like he's the guy that's come to rescue us from the psychology of repression, or the disciplinarianism of repression, or our sort of like craving for disciplinarianism. So he steps in as the kind of kind uncle, the good cop, the open-minded, softly spoken man. I find this whole thing so egregious and appalling, because being like a dad, it just doesn't fucking work. Like this whole idea of like soft voice, understanding, and like, let me listen to all your problems, go from A to Z and drive me bonkers. It just doesn't fucking work.
Yeah, but you're a dad, you're not a therapist, right?
I know, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's a trap. I feel like this whole thing about compassion, listening is a trap, and that's why like people go for the other kind of bonkers, Jordan Peterson, the disciplinarian, because they think, oh, it doesn't work, so discipline has to be the way, but both of them remain inside this tiny setting of the home, this kind of anodyne domestic space. Like often there are examples all about the home, or about just on the street outside, or in the shopping center or something. Jordan Peterson always has kids at the shopping center. That's the problem. They're at this fucking shopping center. Get them out of the shopping center and they'll be all right. They'll stop throwing these tantrums. You won't need to discipline them. But there you go. Right.
All right, should we move on?
No. Can I just go? Sorry, Jakob, because I'm having to do this fucking mute thing that's really annoying. We said was going to be a problem. May I, to depart from part of like the order established, given that something wonderful is happening here in this discussion. I'm always in this position of, I kind of know, like in however many years these things are going to happen in these works that we're considering, and I'm like, I'm having to restrain myself. But I think this is a really good moment, because I almost feel that this dialogue that Foucault chooses, it's from Lucien, and it's a dialogue written about Homotimus, and these were his lectures at the University of California, Berkeley. And basically, it's a state in which like philosophy is in complete disarray, and so when you read the broader dialogue to give some context to this, it's like, rather than, okay, in that grand Athenian period of Athens, where you have, all right, there's Socrates, there's Diogenes, there's this is like in a later like kind of Roman period, where philosophy really has like prostituted itself, and you can imagine going down Philosopher's Street, and kind of like Patrick depicted before in his parody, roll up, here's the cure to your soul, special offer, 25% off, only only one florin a week, or something like this, and then there's this kind of magnificent marketplace scene where rather than like the start of Casablanca in the bazaar, you have everyone like selling their wares who are all like fundamentally exploitative, and that exploitation is brought is brought to the viewer's attention through the presence of Rick, you know, and then there's this beautiful moment at the start of Casablanca where it's, you know, this lady that like Rick knows from Paris, and you know, he starts off, he's like, it's only 1,000 francs. It's like, oh, you know, you're a friend of Rick, it's only 500 francs. And then he ends up saying like, it's only 100 francs. And this kind of like salesman bizarre scenario is what Lucian was depicting in his satire of what philosophy had become in the, I don't know the periodization that Lucian was writing. I think it's in the 1st or 2nd century AD. But it's precisely this dialogue that Foucault in 1983, in his lectures at the University of California, Berkeley, decides to, you know, after having gone through a lot of emotions, and maybe, you know, it's not super long, you know, we don't have to listen to the whole lecture, just his representation of the dialogue of Lucian, if you'd be d'accord.
Can you get it up so we can see it on the screen? Oh no, there's no video, man. Wow, okay.
I would first like to thank the Regents Lecture Committee and the Department of French, and of course my friend Leo Berset. And I would like to tell my friends in Berkeley how glad I feel to be back among them. In a dialogue written at the end of the 2nd century after death, Lucian presents us a so-called walks mumbling in the street. One of his friends, Licinius, sees him, crosses the street, and asks him, "What are you mumbling about?" And the answer comes, "I am trying to remember what I have to tell to my master." And through the conversation between those two, Hermotimus and Licinius, we learn that Hermotimus has been visiting his master for 20 years, that is nearly ruined by the very high cost of those precious lessons. And we learned that Hermotimus may need 20 years more to arrive at the end of his training. But we learn also what those lessons are about. Hermotimus is taught by his master how to take care of himself in the best possible way. I am sure that none of you is a modern Hermotimus, but I hold the bet that most of you have met at least one of those guys who nowadays regularly visit a kind of master who takes their money from them in order to teach them how to take care of themselves. But fortunately enough, I have forgotten, either in French or in English or in German, the name of those modern masters. In antiquity, they were called philosophers.
All right, sick. Shall we move on? All right. So let us enter simulation and resistance, psychiatric levels of will, phase 1. Behavior: voluntary, involuntarily, automatic, spontaneous.
If you tell him to open his eyelids, he raises the right one normally. The left one, however, does not noticeably move, no more than the eyebrow, so that the superciliary asymmetry becomes more marked. In this moment, the skin of the forehead wrinkles transversely on the right side, while it remains almost smooth on the left. At rest, the skin of the forehead is wrinkled neither on the right nor on the left.
Thank you for your contribution, Doctor. But I do believe that 2 more points should be noted. A small dimple, quite visible under a certain angle of light, 8 millimeters above the left eyelid, and about 2 centimeters to the left of the median line of the forehead, and a little projection within the dimple, which seems due to the contraction of the eyelid muscle. These 2 points are very noticeable in comparison with the normal state of the right side.
So some very astute observations, Doctor. I thank you. Lie down, cough, walk, put your leg out, come on, hold out your hand, speak. Read this sentence. Try to write this. Lie down, cough again. Is he mad?
Obey my orders, but keep quiet, and your body will answer for you by giving responses that, because I am a doctor, I alone will be able to decipher and analyze in terms of truth.
So, you want my body to speak. My body will speak, and I really promise you that there will be much more truth than you can imagine in the answers it will give you. Not certainly that my body knows more about it than you, but because there is something in your injunctions that you do not formulate, by which I clearly hear a certain silent injunction to which my body will respond. I hear what you do not say, and I will obey, provide you with symptoms, the truth of which you will have to recognize, since they will respond without your knowing to your unspoken injunctions. And it is this, the effect of your silent injunctions, that you will call hysteria in its nature.
He really is mad.
He is not mad.
Shall we break, or do we want to continue?
Yeah, that is mad, mate, that.
On va?
Wow. Oh. Phase 2, functional mannequins in a hysterical vortex. Give me some symptoms, but give me some stable, coded, regular symptoms.
The life of hysterics is just a constant lie. They put on airs of pity and devotion and succeed in passing themselves off as saints, while they secretly abandon themselves to the most shameful of actions. While at home, with their husbands and children, they make the most violent scenes in which they say coarse and sometimes obscene things.
Oh, my dear doctor, stigmata are phenomena found in every hysteric, even when not suffering an attack. It's a mere contraction of the visual field, simple or double hemianesthesia, pharyngeal anesthesia. I believe it would be a contracture caused by a circular bond around a joint. All these stigmata, of course, you know, doctor, are typical of hysteria. They are constraints in hysteria. But despite their constancy, I have to acknowledge that it quite often happens that we do not find them at all, or even in extreme cases, we do not find any.
Thank you, Dr. Buckley. I will take it from here. If I induce it, if I speak to a hypnotized patient, you cannot walk, and he become paralyzed. You cannot speak, and he become aphasic. Is this really a disease, or is it really an illness? Is it not merely the effect in the patient's body of what has been forced on him? So if hypnosis is a good technique for isolating hysterical phenomena, it is also dangerous since it risks being only the effect of an instruction given, the effect and not the response.
Yeah, that's all very well and good, Doctor, but I need something more than that. Give me some symptoms. Give me some stable, coded, regular symptoms.
Thank you for your contributions, Doctor. I shall do my best to respond. From the age of 6 to 13, Louise was a boarder in a religious convent at La Ferté-sous-Jouarre, where she enjoyed a degree of freedom, wandered in the countryside, willingly let herself be kissed for sweets. She often visited the wife of a workman, Jules, a painter. The latter was in the habit of getting drunk. And when this happened, there were violent arguments in the household. He beat his wife. He dragged her or tied her up by the hair. Louise sometimes witnessed these scenes. One day, Jules would have tried to kiss her, even rape her, and, may I stress, Doctor, would have tried. This gave her a great fright, for during the holidays, here she is between 6 and 13 years of age. She came to Paris and spent the days with her brother, Antonio, who was 1 year younger than her, who seems to have been very precocious and taught her many things that I am sure you would agree she should not have known. He mocked her naivety, which led her to accept the explanation he gave to her of, amongst other things, how children are made, the birds and the bees. During the holidays, in the house where her parents were in service, she had the opportunity to see a Mr. C, who was the master of the house and her mother's lover. Her mother obliged Louise to kiss this man and wanted her to call him her father. On her permanent return to Paris, Louise was placed here, she is 13, in C's home on the pretext of learning to sing and sew, etc. The, as you would, I am sure you would agree, expected behavior of a young lady in training. She slept in a little isolated room. C, whose relationship with his wife was a bit strange, took advantage of her absences to try to have relations with Louise, aged 13 and a half. The first time, he failed. He wanted her to go to bed in front of him. A second attempt ended in some incomplete approaches due to her resistance. A third time, C, after dangling all sorts of promises before her eyes, fine gowns, etc., seeing that she did not want to give in, threatened her with a razor. Taking advantage of her fear, he got her to drink a liqueur, undressed her, threw her down on his bed, and had full sexual intercourse with her. The following day, Louise was suffering, etc.
Thank you, Doctor. However, I must agree with Dr. Verge. Give me some symptoms, but give me some stable, coded, regular symptoms.
Tell me. You must tell me. Peasant, you must be vile. Do you believe this boy more than me? I swear to you that this boy has never laid a hand on me. I did not respond to his caresses. We were in a field. I assure you that I did not want it. Call them! Well! But that is not what you said to him. Antonio, you must repeat what he told you, that he touched me. But I did not want. Antonio, you are lying. It is true. He had a snake in his pants. He wanted to put it in my belly, but he did not even find me. Let's finish with it. We were on a bench. You kissed me more than once. I did not kiss you. I am a lunatic. Antonio, you are laughing.
Please, I did not ask you for a discourse of history. I asked you, give me some symptoms, but give me some stable, coded, regular symptoms.
Celia M. is attentive, sees someone, motions with her head for him to come to her, opens her arms, brings them together as if she was embracing the imaginary being. Her physiognomy, wow, I can't say that word today. It will return with a failed. What a doctor. Expresses discontent to start with. Disappointment, then, in a sudden change, happiness. At this point, we see some movements of the stomach. Her legs bend. M falls back on her bed and makes new clonic movements. With a rapid movement, she moves her body to the right side of the bed, her head resting on the pillow. Her face is flushed, her body parts roll over itself. Her right cheek lying on the pillow, her face looking to the right. The patient presents her buttocks, which are raised, the lower limbs being bent. After some moments, while maintaining this lubricious position, M makes some movements with her pelvis. She then stands up, has some major clonic movements. Finally, she grimaces, cries, seems deeply frustrated. She sits down again, looks to the left, signals with her head and the right hand. She witnesses varied scenes, seemingly, by the play of her physiognomy.
Physiognomy, it's a silent G.
Physiognomy. To experience pleasant and painful sensations alternately. Suddenly, she puts her body back in the middle of the bed, raises it slightly with her right hand, makes the gesture of mea culpa, followed by contortions and grimaces. Then she lets out some sharp cries. Oh la la! Smiles, looks around with a lubricious air, sits down, seems to see Ernst, and says, "Well, come on then. Come on."
As I've said before, give me some symptoms, but give me some stable, coded, regular symptoms.
May I add, doctors, that for my own part, I am far from thinking that lubricity is always at work in hysteria. I am even perhaps convinced of the contrary.
Oh, hysteria. Everyone knows full well that it's a matter of sexuality.
When I heard this, I was really surprised and said to myself, but if he knows, why doesn't he say so?
Dear doctor, M. Charcot for Genevieve, suffering from hysterical spasms. She is on a stretcher. The interns and the senior doctors have previously hypnotized her. She undergoes her major hysterical attack. Charcot, following his usual technique, shows how hypnosis can not only provoke, induce hysterical phenomena, but can also stop them. He takes his baton, resting it on the patient's belly, precisely on the ovaries, and the attack is in fact suspended. Charcot removes his baton, and the attack begins again. Tonic period, clonic period, delirium. And at the moment of delirium, Genevieve cries out, Camille, Camille, kiss me, give me your cock.
Oh, enough. Enough with this fucking sexual bullshit. I want symptoms. Stable, coded, regular fucking symptoms.
Doctor, you want to find the cause of my symptoms, the cause that will enable you to pathologize them, enable you to function as a doctor. You want this trauma? Well, you will get all my life, and you won't be able to avoid hearing me recount my life, and at the same time, seeing me mime my life anew and endlessly reactualize it in my attacks. If you want to make your hypnosis natural, and each of your injunctions to cause the kind of symptoms you can take as natural, if you want to use me to denounce the simulators, well then, you really will have to hear what I want to say and see what I want to do.
Doctors, my colleagues, may I say that at this moment, I reach a point of frustration. Give me some symptoms, but give me some stable, coded, regular symptoms.
It's funny how we all went towards like the Fae, the camp, and the kind of snakily soft voice in our deliveries. I actually felt myself becoming almost being inhabited by kind of like, you know, viperish, Sybil-like woman at the end there. Almost I was going to grow like long nails, you know, and a few scales on the back of my neck. There is this incredibly weird relationship between the Doctor as like, you know, as he appears in Charcot and these hysterics, which are these weird kind of like chimera figures, aren't they? He kind of brings them out. And where do they live? They live in like the kind of dungeons of the hospital, you know, and he wheels them out at the opportune moment to function as like seismographs or barometers or these weird kind of recording devices, beautifully named by Foucault, you know, the was it functional mannequins, you know. There's this, and you can imagine them being actual talking mannequins, you know, like the sort of AI version of the hysteric. And their role is very weird as well, because if you think about it, their role is all to do with recruiting new hysterics. You know, it's got this horrible kind of like, you know, like, you know, in like horror films where, you know, you get a bite and you become a zombie, you know, or like there's an amazing kids TV show, I'm sure you remember, Luke, called The Demon Headmaster. And basically, if you look in the eyes of someone who's looked into the eyes of the Demon Headmaster, then you get this weird swirly thing in your eyes as well. You know?
Right.
So, but I think it speaks to this general truth about evil being contagious, catching in some way, you know. And so that the hysterics, again, I just don't know how to make sense of this except mythologically. They also function just to swell the numbers of hysterics. You know, the more number of people who've got the swirly eyes or been bitten, or vampires again function the same way, don't they? You know, you bite someone in a particular way and they get transformed into a vampire. So our culture seems to be kind of like, you know, obsessed with this particular idea of the contagiousness of evil. Even like our reaction to pandemics are like tainted with kind of moral hypochondria, not just, you know, hypochondria to do with health. Like the leper syndrome, you know, the exile the lepers. Don't tell them when the boat is leaving, you know.
Can I go in and just riff a little bit? I just want to quote something that I thought was beautiful, that relates to the swirl. Let me see if I can find it. 1 second. And then I'll after that I'll just pose a question that I think maybe can kick us off with chapter 12. I'm sure Luke has a lot to say. All right. So I'll just read something, and this is from page. It just sits on the bridge between 308 and 309. And Foucault says, "I do not think that there was exactly an epidemic of hysteria. I think hysteria was the set of phenomena and phenomena of struggle which occurred within as well as outside of the asylum, around this new medical apparatus of clinical neurology. And it was the maelstrom of this battle which in fact summoned around hysterical symptoms all those people who actually joined in the battle. Rather than an epidemic, there was a maelstrom, a kind of hysterical vortex within psychiatric power and its disciplinary system. I don't know, there's just speaking of the swirl and the maelstrom and the kind of vortex. I don't know, it was a very powerful image, I think, of the whole, vortex crisis, the situation there in France at this point. But then I was thinking, there was this other passage on, it's 314, where Foucault kind of goes in, and this is, to me, there was a kind of swamp here where I was a bit confused, like what is he actually saying here with the insured patient and the neurological body, and he introduces this kind of new category of patient, which is not the one who gets aid or the one who pays, but the insured patient, who I guess is a worker in many times. So here at the end of 314, he writes, there are two possibilities, in fact. Either the traumatized person displays the same symptoms as the hysteric. Obviously, I'm talking about someone traumatized who has no trace of a lesion. And as a result, we can say he has the same illness as the hysteric. Since the first maneuver consisted in showing that the hysteric was ill, and so the hysteric will authenticate the traumatized person's illness, or the traumatized person will not have the same illness, will not display the same symptoms as the hysteric, and as a result will fall outside the field of pathology, and one will be able to ascribe his symptoms to simulation.
Well, just to respond to that directly from the next page, 315. I'm going to do a Donald Trump voice, because everyone benefits. In the first place, the insurance companies, of course, and the people who had to pay, and also the patient. No, I'll stop the voice. It was just everyone benefits. It's going to be great. There's this kind of like a tonal similarity just in that first line of it's going to be great, it's going to be fantastic. We're going to make a good deal. And there's always in the, I don't even know anymore if it is cynicism, but there is something going on in Trump and, his discourse. This, everyone benefits, everyone gets a good deal. Well, you've been charging us for this, and we've been charging you that, and you know what we're going to do? We're going to take the tariffs down to half. That's a good deal. You should take the deal. And it's this, everyone benefits. In the first place, the insurance companies, of course, and the people who had to pay. And also the patient to a certain extent, since if he is not a simulator, a malignerer, Shako said, we cannot deny him something, albeit obviously not of the same order as if he had a real injury. So the cake was cut in two, and you can almost imagine Trump again using this kind of, had he a slightly more imaginative metaphorical register. We're going to cut the cake of America. We're going to divide it. There's the cake makers. There's the people who eat the cake. We all get a slice. However, clearly, this is not the important problem. The doctor also benefits, since, thanks to the use of the hysteric as a functional mannequin, the doctor could make a differential diagnosis that will now be brought to bear on the simulator. One will now be able to master the famous panic dread of the simulator that so obsessed doctors in the first half of the 19th century, since one will have these hysterics who, traitors to their own lie, the traitors to America, to the dream, as it were, will make it possible to denounce the lie of others. And as a result, the doctor will finally have the upper hand over simulation. And I just wanted to, so I can't put that there. Just go back to a passage that Jakob chose in the script on page 322. And it's Charcot's demonstration of his technique and the success of this technique. And I mean, it's almost so obvious to me. It's more than pornographic. He takes his baton, resting it on the patient's belly, precisely on the ovaries, and the attack is in fact suspended. Charcot removes his baton. The attack begins again. And even in this, just these little two sentences, you have like the thrusting motion almost, you know, of like there's something here that is so profoundly sexual, you know, and not just in the resting of the baton, and that's what cures the attack, but then it has to be removed, and then it has to be put in again. You know, we have to move in this way to stop this attack. You know, that's the cure. That's the cure. It's me and my baton. You know.
And as far as theatre goes, it prefigures really like corny and cheesy game shows. You know, the imagery is so phallic that it becomes invisible in its kind of obviousness. You know, and it's a kind of like almost like a Jimmy Savile kind of crudeness. This idea of going with your baton, I mean, like, and touching the uterus, like, you know, there's no ambiguity there. So there's nothing to read, there's nothing to interpret, there's no pleasure in interpretation. So it's kind of lost in its own obviousness somehow, if that makes sense. You know, like the crude way in which, I don't know, like, as an example of this, I remember seeing like this, I think on Fahrenheit, you know, 11/9, Donald Trump with his daughter. You know, do you remember? Have anyone seen this?
No.
And he's just sitting next to her in like an interview that's being televised, and he's just like, you know, she's fucking hot, isn't she? You know, if I wasn't her dad, you know, and it's just it's that utter shamelessness means that like that you can't register it, because somehow in order to interpret something as seedy and delinquent, there needs to be this gap, you know, where interpretation can move. But if it's so, you know, excessively corny and in your face, it's almost like that some weirdly slips through the mind. And I think, like, I mean, come on, like the baton on her uterus. It's so ludicrous. You're like, well, it can't mean that. No, it must be just something else, you know. It's me, you know. And it's this constantly that it's always hedged in. I mean, Foucault doesn't even interpret it because it would be ludicrous. You know, it'd be so overdetermined. Be so excessive to start talking about it. All he does is just put it in the context of other, you know, little hysterical episodes that recount, like, you know, give me your cock or whatever it is, you know, or you know, this girl being raped by her stepfather, you know, or recounting some weird ambiguous story about being kissed on a park bench. He just kind of like curates this little, you know, gallery of exhibits and allows us to infer, because interpretation would be too crude there.
But just to bring something into the club, and then let's you know, Jakob see what it says, because, you know, this is you know, his curated kind of choice. You know, speaking of insertion. And you know, the point you're making, Hatrick, is something that maybe this is a whole new dimension of like Foucault's play that I didn't even think of, because now we can think of this, right? Now we can kind of say, well, you know, the baton, it's the cock, and you know, and then maybe we can take it in my way, and it's the you know, there's the movement in the writing that is indicative of like thrusting, you know, like the baton has to be there, you know, right next to the ovaries. And then when it comes out, the attack finishes, and then it goes in again. But, you know, we live in a kind of age of pornography. And something remarkable about that book that I read recently There was, for me, a very disappointing book, which was about, it's called like Girl on Girl, kind of. And when I was reading it, it was funny because I've read, of course, all of the references that she was quoting, especially Naomi Wolf and Ariel Levy. And she kind of like situates so much of the problem of, I mean, it's a very, very interesting, very strange book from a kind of, like a narratorial perspective, because she's like constantly like recusing herself from her own statements, but she's not doing so in a way that's like, okay, I'm going to say this and I'm going to say it from this perspective, or it's almost like a form of her own unconscious struggle that's been projected like onto the page. Now, one claim that she makes kind of over and over again, and I think becomes interesting in this context, is the extent to which contemporary relationships in the kind of West, are massively influenced by porn. So it isn't kind of, and me and Jakob and Jakob's girlfriend, we were having a really lovely discussion the other day, and we were talking about like kind of complexities and there's something, I don't know, like to me here it's just okay, so we have this thing that to us, we read this thing, this page 322 that Jakob has inserted into into my sphere, and it's just so there, it's so blatant, it's so obvious, it's so pornographic. And then there's this book, that was released and that, I bought as a first edition hardback because I was interested as to whether or not it would contribute to like, to the history of feminism and feminist thought and what it might mean. And there is like a kind of narratorial strangeness to this book, but the touchstone of the book that she returns to over and over again is pornography, pornography, pornography. Now, Foucault is, of course, speaking at a time when, pornography was still something that, you had to. I mean, it was maybe part of your childhood, Jakob, but certainly part of me and Patrick's. Where you'd go rooting through newspaper bins looking for like a copy of The Sport, which would have like bare-breasted women, right? And then maybe there'd be like a game of kind of mischief and one-upmanship where you'd have an argument with your mates and you'd be like, right, who's going to go and pretend to be old enough to buy a porno? So like porn, it had this kind of status, and of course it was present, but it wasn't present in this kind of like instant information age way. And to take it back to something we spoke about before, this is almost a kind of prelude, right? Because at this time, it was precisely when Jimmy Savile, and just in the most recent Adam Curtis, there's a scene where it's like Jimmy Savile ushering in a group of young girls to Queen Elizabeth's, kind of like
Margaret Thatcher.
Or is it sorry, to Margaret Thatcher's palatial offices, and he gives this like look to the camera that's like, but there was some kind of like to steal a word from that Patrick often uses that I quite like. There was like a kind of impishness, like a mischievousness, yet that there was still a gap, right? Because at that time, the notion that Jimmy Savile was a monstrous paedophile, or in fact, to use what I believe the correct terminology, a pederast, the paedophile being the one who indulges in images and fantasies, and the pederast being the one who enacts them. And I remember that there was this kind of this national reconciliation in Britain that I think Adam Curtis so beautifully evokes in that recent series that I've not finished watching yet, but that I think is from the outside, and if you're not British, it's the most elusive and the most strange. It's the point when he becomes the least didactic, and it's the point where his kind of like métier, I don't know quite how to pronounce it, but is this like work with the archive and with the image. And previously, kind of, if we go back to like the Century of the Self, it's this like video essay where, he explains things, and then the images are kind of like illustrative, but then at some point they take on a kind of like artistic dimension that's out of his control. Whereas in this new series, which is precisely called, I think, Shifty, it's called Shifty. It's like, these images, they just take on like a whole new dimension. And part of like national self-reflection and national self-reconciliation that happened in Britain was that, this beloved figure of television, was actually abusing these, horribly abusing these young women. And part of that was a scene where him and Gary Glitter, who was also a monstrous and violent pederast, it's on Top of the Pops. So Gary Savile used to host Top of the Pops, and they're both sat next to each other. And I might be incorrect in my memory, but in my memory, I have this image, and it's Gary Glitter on the left. As well, if you're looking at the screen, it's to the right of the screen is Gary Glitter, to the left of the screen is Jimmy Savile, and they have like a very young girl, like a very visibly young girl, like one on each knee. And Jimmy Savile, he leans over to Gary Glitter and he's like, I think we can take care of both of these, can't we? And Gary Glitter like laughs, and this like scene, this image became part of like a, I don't know, like a national expression of like grief, reconciliation, where this previously loved figure had, in a kind of like mischievous way, inserted the truth of himself into, all of these, like now when you look back and you look at like, how Jimmy Savile would behave with Top of the Pops, when you hear the witness testimonies of, how he behaved backstage, and especially with young girls, it's like, how did no one see what was going on? And so it was just in relationship specifically to this passage here. I think, we have to exercise a little care that we are in that kind of like post kind of like part of moment when maybe, the gap of interpretation was there. And maybe that gap of interpretation was precisely, the elevation of Foucault into this, kind of godlike status where, the people might have read it at that point, and this is just my final observation, they might have read it at that point and thought, oh, yeah, well, maybe he was, maybe he was talking about like just literally a dick and thrusting. But then it dissolves away into a certain kind of academic, intellectual like reflection, and so loses the immediacy which is there in the text.
I mean, I think he's just joking, or like, he's
laughing. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's very in the text when he does it, and also because of this kind of complicated relationship that Foucault has to sex and the hysterics. It seems that he just plants this here to be like, bro, like, I mean, what do you really think? I mean, are you just like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, he to me, he just brings out this. He tries to like open up this kind of Foucault's hypocrisy and like, and the complexities that Foucault himself seemingly had to deal with. Of like, okay, so but medically, I have to kind of look away. I cannot speak of sexuality. I cannot, like I cannot include it in the analysis because then everything kind of fucks up, right? But something else that I'm thinking of is what is actually going on in this thing. Because Foucault, again, I mean, what I said before, he doesn't really describe the process of hypnosis or magnetism. And I'm just curious, like, what is actually going on in this thing? Because it's kind of ridiculous to talk about it if we don't know what is it that he performs on this patient before he, starts waving his baton around.
Mm. Yeah, there is this weird thing as well, like which goes with that kind of like psychedelic or telepathic link between Charcot as kind of like, boss or master of the revels, and the hysterics as these weird kind of like chimera or mythological objects or symbols. is the fact that is in and through their hypnotizability that they are pathologizable as hysterics, which is to say that it's precisely the fact that he's able to hypnotize them, put them under hypnosis, that allows him to classify them, and categorize them as hysterics. So it's almost like, they're my women. We've got a special thing, we've got a special bond going on. I've got a sixth sense for how to put them under. They listen to my voice. Like was it Parcel Tongue in Harry Potter? I know how to talk the language of the snakes. And I think like I'm the same as you, Jakob. I would love to know what's going on in these hypnosis sessions. But there are loads of modern, mesmerists and people that claim to be able to put, I forget his name now, the really famous one in England. But anyway, like people who started out as magicians, basically. And again, this is on the same sort of trajectory, not the paedophilic thing, but, in terms of the mixing up of like entertainment on the one hand, the game show host, and then someone who eventually migrates into the field of philosophy on the other hand, and somehow these two things become kind of crossed, so you get these mesmerists and hypnotists that then become like write self-help books, and become like motivational speakers, and will use their hypnosis in order to be able to, bring confidence back into a person's psyche, bring self-belief back into their lives and so on and so forth. So there are probably like versions of this that we could watch, but they'd still be, I think, enigmatic to us, because we'd be like, well, how does that put someone under hypnosis? How does merely doing, what are they doing there? Did I get all of it? Like, did I actually see everything that happened there? Because that it seems to be too little. Someone like Darren Brown spoke about this. I remember watching this when I was younger, and he was like, some people just can't be hypnotized. So part of it is a kind of trick of television, like that scam, to do with, I got, I email like 10,000 people, my guesses for the next race, the Gold Cup at Cheltenham, and out of those 10,000, and then I do the next race and the next race and the next race. And so out of those 10,000, there are about 100 that think that I've got the right answer every time. It's just a numbers game. So the people that you see being hypnotized on the television are just one of those like microscopic proportion of people who are susceptible to these particular influences. It comes also, so for me, it comes out of the craving to be hypnotized, the desire to be put under hypnosis, a sort of desperation to be hypnotized almost. So it's just like what Luke described earlier with this Gabor Mate thing, about my trauma. Oh, it's my trauma. Thank the Lord, or the fainting that goes on inside, those kind of like makeshift Baptist churches in America, the kind of healing, the artists of healing, the people, the big sermonists, who make people like, feign or go delirious or go into epileptic fits in which they have these epiphanies or revelations of the word of God. It's all about, atmosphere, conjuring, a sort of play of seduction. But just have to think of, I don't know, like you could get stuck in a honey trap, couldn't you? It's only like one step away from that. From like a beautiful woman blushing and fluttering her eyelids, and making you feel good about yourself, and kind of like ensorceling you with all these disguised forms of flattery, and then at the last minute when you go outside, whatever it is, the KGB come and nab you. It's this. I think hypnosis is just like the next level of that kind of gullibility for me.
I mean, possibly. Maybe we can. Maybe we can also leave it. I'm not. I don't want to insist. There's so much to talk about with the hysteria and these things. But I'm just curious, like at that point, because they have all these bizarre practices of like ether, hashish, like all these kind of things. It's just interesting to understand, like, how did hypnosis actually work? What did they do? And like, how effective were they? Because I think, I've seen a lot of hypnosis, like contemporary things. For example, in MSU Stats, there is this kind of short, brief sequence where someone uses this kind of autosuggestion kind of thing, which is already manifestation, right? It's, I mean, autosuggestion as such is like a deep, profound part of manifestation. But it's like some kind of hypnotist, and those, you know, like these kind of POV hypnosis on people, and, you know, instills like all these affirmations and all these like tools for manifestation in people. Yeah, well, you know, well, we can. I don't have much more to say about that.
Well, just to kind of like come in on that, you know, like I said, maybe I've been like algorithmically like thrown out of these circles because I'm not clicking buy, you know, and I'm just like watching. So I mean, in some kind of like algorithmic way, like a waste of their advertisement energy. But when I was watching some of the stuff to try and get into the, you know, the mindset of them, and we were working together on them, it gave like an algorithmic profile to my YouTube, and I saw one recently, and what fascinated me about it was he was using all of these, like, it's like the techniques, they haven't really changed. All that changes is the vocabulary. So now, you know, it's like, it's you know, it's this thing, and there was a scene, and it's where, you know, he brings someone up on stage. So already there, you know, we have like a willing volunteer, and this person comes on stage, and this guy, you know, he's speaking very fast, and he's speaking and he's like, okay, you know, I'm going to show you, I'm going to demonstrate you know, to you in this way, like how we do. And he makes this kind of like compression upon this lady's chest, and then like holds her for a moment, and then, you know, and then he's like, boom, that's the dopamine, you know, that's the dopamine right there. And what I'm thinking of is I'm thinking of Donnie Darko, right? Which is like to me, like when I watched it again with a good friend, I was like, wow, this is one of the great, like, you know, cinematic masterpieces of Hollywood. I mean, it's like so good. Like, you know, like if anyone could produce a masterpiece like Donnie Darko, and that'd be the one work of your life, it'd be a fucking great one. And it's incredible. And to you know, and we can leave this here if you'd like, but just to bring it back to the Gabor Mate thing, it's the rescue mechanisms. It's that they always have like this kind of like preparation of eventuality, right? You know, if it all fucks up, if the person, you know, is not hypnotized, if they don't, you know, show or prestate the signs, you know, and that's something that you know, happens in you know, Donnie Darko in a kind of like a forceful way, because he's presented with someone who just rejects everything, but then his rescue mechanism is to go back to, well, you know, it's something like, you know, there I see a young man who's chosen the road of fear over love. Then he kind of like re-articulates this chicanery, this con artistry. And that was what I really wanted to finish, was watching Gabor Mate and watching him in this context of you know, not in like an individual psychosocial context. And yeah, and just to, you know, to point out is that I have experience of, you know, that kind of context, and it certainly doesn't have the air of cynicism, you know. And Gabor Mate in that thing where he kind of loses his shit about Israel, and then he kind of comes back to this like, oh, you know, I'm the therapist, and he's like, hey, you know, I'm sorry about how I reacted right there. That was because of my unresolved trauma from the Holocaust, you know. And I'm watching this thing, and so that was like the kind of the third point that I see there, and I think you see that in of all of these kind of con artists. It's like, you know, they want the con, and then it is a kind of like a numbers game, right? Because people have to be willing, and there is a certain voluntarism. But then at the same time, they have to like maintain the audience. You know, they have to maintain the stage. They have to maintain this power and control. And so it's like that they have like a number of, you know, I've just called them lazily rescue mechanisms. But let's just say, you know, like things or ways in which they regain this kind of like you know, this therapeutic tone. And then just one last, well, not one last, I'm sure I'll be the boring scholar for for a long time in these discussions. But as a boring scholarly point, you know, Foucault talks a lot about the automatic effects of power. And then he talks a lot about not understanding power in and through its mechanisms, but rather through its effects. So maybe in a, you know, and I can't impute, of course, you know, into what Foucault was thinking when he was writing these things, but it does have like an immediate resonance to me. Like it makes sense to me that he's thinking at this level of effect, and he's specifically committed to, and you know, he articulates this many times, to studying the effect, and then to, you know, kind of like reverse engineering the mechanism. But really his concentration is on the effect. Now that, you know, that might be not great, it might be duplicitous, but I do think he has his back covered. Sorry, it's just you know, when you say that in the context of Foucault, it has a particular tenor, because you know, he was certainly not a man who wanted his back covered. But you know, but perhaps that it's like a small explanation that, and you know, and perhaps it's not satisfactory, but that, you know, he is committed to this sense of, okay, you know, we don't actually study the mechanisms, the how it works, because for some reason that maybe we'll get into later, that doesn't matter. You know, maybe getting into that is like getting into a whole world of you know, contemporary you know, current paradigms, you know, like the dopamine one, for example, at the moment. You know, we might say, oh, okay, do you know what, like that things work because yeah, they get the dopamine hit, you know, that's the reason why the people are addicted to you know, social media or whatever. Whereas, and I kind of agree methodologically, at least at the level of his own text, that wow, you know, why don't we kind of like forget about all of that and escape, you know, the whatever the current paradigm is, and rather just look at the effect. Because like with these con men who perform these, you know, these moves and these you know, these things of like chicanery and seduction, the kind of important point, well, at least the more important point, and what allows us a historical perspective, you know, that allows us to see that this has been happening all the way, you know, since Lucian's Hermotimus. It's the effects. It's the fact of hypnosis rather than the mechanics of hypnosis itself. And maybe that'd be something interesting to bring in, you know, to bring into a discussion with an actual, you know, practicing psychiatrist. You know, maybe that'd be an interesting space to have that discussion, and to ask, like, you know, someone who's in practice about this move that Foucault makes about, hey, you know, let's not study the mechanism, let's just study the effects, let's study the outcome. And that, just as a final thing, that links to this movement in psychiatric practice in the UK, that, you know, I would be very interested to hear if it is just, you know, specific to the kind of institutional milieu and context of the UK, or if it's something that's, you know, more broadly represented in psychiatric process. It's something that, you know, I sent in the message that I wanted to speak about, which is this thing about like managerialism and management. Now that to me is like a very specific way in which psychiatric practice in the United Kingdom, like, it doesn't actually care about understanding anymore. It doesn't care about, you know, even like the possibility of cure is completely foreign. It just cares about the effect. It's like, can this person go to work? Can these people fulfill a socially expected role?
I mean, there are loads of things there. One thing that I'd say is just, and Isaka, do you want to go first?
No, you go.
Just like in relation to like the Charcot thing, yeah. Well, the weird thing about Charcot is that he doesn't seem to be preying upon, like, or obsessed with or fanatical about the weak in the way that like the people we've just been describing are. You know, they almost want subjects that are kind of like, well, maybe in some other areas, but they want subjects who are fit for hypnosis. Yeah, so they can practice their dark arts and necromancy on it, and they get this theatrical moment where they stand forth as the kind of like the master, the expert, the kind of like you know, this person who you know, because there's something incredibly seductive about being able to like pull the strings of someone else's mind, you know. And if you can pull the strings of someone else's mind, then you stand over and above the rest of humanity, like a kind of Pygmalion, someone that, you know, who can make men and make women, not just someone who is a man or is a woman themselves. Now, there are loads of things to say about this. One, that it's like, you know, the philosopher always enables you to make yourself, you know, never wants to like be the sculptor of your psyche, you know, never wants to kind of like merely reduce you to an object that they've worked on, you know, their own masterpiece. So there's some fundamental kind of like violation of the law of philosophy or something. That's a kind of like short way of saying it. But the more interesting thing, to go back to Charcot, is that he's like, or the thing that Foucault depicts in Charcot is he's like, no, I've got to nail these hysterics, you know, these slippery, elusive, kind of impish beings that keep defying me, that keep overturning me, you know, these kind of like demonic entities that I can't quite grapple with or get a hold on. And then you get, and this is the thing that I was like, you know, really liked in one of the passages that Jakob prepared for us. It's about this radical ambiguity about who is in charge, the hysteric or the doctor. And the doctor's madness is all about the fact that he does not know whether he's in charge or whether the hysteric is in charge. He's met, in the hysteric, he meets the kind of like the black hole or vortex that lies at the limits of his own authority, the limits of his own expertise, and the limits of his own mastery. And there's this like incredible thing where Foucault, as Foucault describes it, maybe I'm kind of like fleshing it out and like revisualizing it here. But as Foucault describes it, it's almost like the hysteric is being hypnotized, you know, and is playing up to the doctor, being a good little puppy dog and jumping through all the correct hoops. And the doctor has this moment where I don't know is it the hysteric speaking, or is it like the hysteric's voice in the doctor's head? And the hysteric like seeds the doctor with this idea, but how do you know that it's you who's giving the commands to me to do things, and not me who is the one planting the commands in your head? Okay, so it's like, you know, it's in this bit here where oh shit, I'm gonna waste all my fucking time trying to find it, but fuck, I don't know, where the hell did it go? Anyway, it's there somewhere, but it's like this moment where you know, you have the doctor that invents this new concept. Charcot invents this new concept of trauma. Okay, and what like the beautiful way in which like Foucault describes it again is that trauma is this kind of it's a moment of violence, or, you know, some impactful event, but that inscribes itself in the mind as what he calls a hypnotic injunction, you know, so that trauma exists precisely in the form of hypnotic suggestion. Okay, it stays there in the mind. This is where we talk about the whole stuff about triggering and so on. Yeah, but then there's the question of who is the artist of trauma, who invents the trauma. Okay, so the doctor has to ground his own injunctions, you know, in this discovered trauma. Otherwise, he's just a manipulator. You know, he's just a kind of puppet master. He's just a kind of like devil character who's able to say, you know, as it's parodied, you know, oh, be quiet, and the hypnotized patient shuts up, or move your leg, and the hypnotized patient moves their leg. But the doctor doesn't want to be this kind of street performer and this magician. He wants to be able to, you know, isolate and discover a truth. So the movements that the hypnotized patient makes under hypnosis have to correspond to some reality. Yeah, and this reality is the trauma. But when the doctor goes looking for the trauma, there's a little voice in his head, the voice of the hysteric, which says, but what if I just invented this trauma? Okay. Then again, the tables would be turned, you know. It would be you in the passenger seat and me driving, you know. And what I think that Foucault loves about this, the phenomenon of the hysteric, is precisely this introduction of the radical uncertainty into the whole of psychiatric power, you know, into the attempt of psychiatric power to ground itself in truth, you know. So here we go. Sorry, this is it. It was Jakob. It was Jakob's bit. because this is the whole, like, I forgot this bit where the whole point in hypnosis is to make the body speak. That's the thing I forgot, because language is shifty, unreliable, subversive. You can play games with language, you can tell stories, you can tell lies, but then there's this neurological fantasy that the body is the thing that speaks the truth. And what you can do is, through a kind of art of stimuli, it's creating stimuli, you can make the body speak. And then I'm just going to read the bit that Jakob read earlier. So you want my body to speak, my body will speak. And I really promise you that there will be much more truth than you can imagine in the answers it will give you. So again, a superabundance of truth, an avalanche of truth, an inundation of truth. The implication being that you can't handle that much truth. Next, not certainly that my body knows more about it than you, but because there is something in your injunctions which you do not formulate. So the master is not in control of his own injunctions. Something in your injunctions that you do not formulate, but which I can clearly hear. A certain silent injunction to which my body will respond. I will hear what you do not say, and I will obey. So she's kind of, performing the same maneuver on the doctor as the doctor performs on him. You have got rid of language and you have tried to make my body speak. But I can hear a language beneath your language. I can hear the language of your body just as you can hear the language of my body too. Did you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So every trick that the doctor comes up with, every advance, every innovation is mirrored and parodied instantly by the hysteric. Okay. Which is why the hysteric represents this impasse in psychiatry. This black hole, this vortex. But again, it all has to do. What really interests me is about these kind of, like, the thing that we seem to love and return to are almost like the infinitesimal gestures of either language or the body. Look at, like, Luke's analysis of different psychologists. It's all about the tone of voice, and he keeps going back to it, and he keeps trying out new words, and he tries to imitate the tone of voice, and then he tries to set the tone of voice within a certain narrative, where this particular line is brought out at the end of the narrative, like a kind of rabbit from the hat. So there's a credible strain on Luke's part to be able to depict something that's beyond words, but that is crucial. Okay, and somehow that level of influence is the level at which the psychiatrist and the hysteric do battle. It's not at the level of language, it's at the level of these tiny microscopic tactics of influence.
Can I mean, it's, well, lots to say, very beautiful. I feel I would like to move to the end, just to spice things up, because I'm curious. I'm sure you both have a lot to say, and I guess it also serves as some kind of summary. And I'm going to do something that I'm not very proud of, but I'm going to mimic Bernard Arcourt.
Dirty boy.
No, but we see where we go from it. So this is the last sentence of the 12th lecture. So Foucault writes, by breaking down the door of the asylum, by ceasing to be mad so as to become patient, by finally getting through to a true doctor, that is to say, the neurologist, and by providing him with genuine functional symptoms, the hysterics, to their great pleasure, but doubtless to our greater misfortune, gave rise to a medicine of sexuality. And here is where he brings in the medicine of sexuality at the end of kind of a page, at the very end of chapter 12. And I feel there is a lot of sauce here to kind of both for Foucault's future kind of trajectories. But well, I mean, yeah, lots to say. It's interesting that this is where he ends. and thinking about what will come as well.
Yeah, 1 second.
Well, just to to reinsert that ending into this kind of this script that Jakob kind of conjured today, like a Yalla. It's just to take that last fragment that I mean, yeah, I'm not going to talk about Bernard. So it's slightly longer, but it's the passage that we talked about, and then that's what actually leads up to this final passage. So it's, for amusement, I will quote this little episode, and just to point out, uncontextualized. I think there's an importance there, that this passage about Genevieve and Charcot and the baton and all this is something where, like, Foucault's like, for amusement, because maybe for amusement, I will quote this little episode I found in the Charcot archives. It's a student's note that what's more is without irony. Quote, M. Charcot sends for Genevieve. This is the words of a student. Suffering from hysterical spasms. She is on a stretcher. The interns, the senior doctors, have previously hypnotized her. She undergoes her major hysterical attack. Charcot, following his usual technique, shows how hypnosis can not only provoke, induce hysterical phenomena, but can also stop them. He takes his baton, resting it on the patient's belly, precisely on the ovaries, and the attack is in fact suspended. Charcot removes his baton. The attack begins again. Tonic period, clonic period, delirium. And at the moment of delirium, Genevieve cries out, Camille, Camille, kiss me, give me your cock. Professor Charcot has Genevieve taken away. Her delirium continues. It seems to me that this kind of bacchanal, this sexual pantomime, is not the as yet undeciphered residue of the hysterical syndrome. My impression is that this sexual bacchanal should be taken as the counter maneuver by which the hysterics responded to the ascription of trauma. You want to find the cause of my symptoms, the cause that will enable you to pathologize them and enable you to function as doctor. You want this trauma? Well, you will get all my life, and you won't be able to avoid hearing me recount my life, and at the same time, seeing me mime my life anew and endlessly reactualize it in my attacks. So, this sexuality is not an indecipherable remainder, but the hysterics' victory cry, the last maneuver by which they finally get the better of the neurologist and silence him. If you want symptoms, something functional, if you want to make your hypnosis natural in each of your injunctions to cause the kind of symptoms you can take as natural, if you want to use me to denounce the simulators, well then, you really will have to hear what I want to say and see what I want to do. In Charcot, who saw everything, who in the low slanting daylight saw even the smallest dimples and the smallest bumps on a paralytic's face, was indeed obliged to turn his admirable eyes when the patient was saying all that she had to say. At the end of this kind of great battle between the neurologist and the hysteric around the clinical apparatus of neuropathology, a new body appears beneath the apparently captured neurological body, beneath the body that the neurologist hoped and believed he had really captured in truth. This new body is no longer the neurological body, it is the sexual body. It is the hysteric who imposes this new personage on neurologists and doctors, which is no longer the pathological anatomical body of Laennec and Bichat, the disciplinary body of psychiatry, or the neurological body of Duchenne de Boulogne or Charcot, but the sexual body confronted with which henceforth only two attitudes were possible. Either there is the attitude of Charcot's successor, Babinski, which consists in a retrospective devaluation of hysteria, which, since it has these connotations, will no longer be an illness, or there is a new attempt to circumvent the maneuver of hysterical encirclement so as to give a medical meaning to this new course that loomed up on all sides around the neurological body fabricated by the doctors. This new investment will be the medical, psychiatric, and psychoanalytic takeover of sexuality.
I feel there's so much to like. I mean, it's just kind of piling over me. I don't know what to do with it.
It's true, yeah. I think
I'm
maybe
just thinking
on, yeah.
about, okay, so Freud is there at Salpêtrière, or however you pronounce it. He, you know, is with Charcot and is there for 6 months, or I can't remember what it is. And then, of course, he does what he does with it, which is already there, to just follow this kind of genealogy is super interesting. And then we have Lacan later, who then, I mean, and then also Janet, right, is involved in this also, which the French, they kind of adore him, and they think Freud is bullshit, and, you know, he's taken things too far and blah, blah. And then Lacan kind of, resurrects Freud, but also then at this moment of also when, I mean, I guess it's the 60s, 70s, when it's the prison activism and all this kind of stuff. Where Lacan has to respond to all these kind of problems of hysteria, and I think where he, I mean, chooses a very different path from Freud, and kind of insisting on, I don't know, truth. If I can't say I know Lacan that well, but super interesting. I mean, all of it, and how Foucault kind of sits and knows that all of this is going to happen, and how he must also know like the whole kind of history, especially like French history, of how this was like being like ping pong back and forth, and how Salpêtrière was transformed, and blah blah blah. I mean, I don't know, very interesting. I think. Well, I would just like to know more about that, or kind of to understand that kind of history.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's way too, like, we're casting well ahead of ourselves. We're going to get into Freud and Lacan now. You're right. Like, it's too overwhelming. We can't like reduce them to little sound bites, can we? Include little sort of like caption versions of them in this lecture. But it is interesting to see, as you said, Jakob, like how Freud is like positioning himself, preparing for the next battle. You know, putting his little soldiers in their places. And there are loads of like, there are snide remarks galore, aren't they, all throughout this text. And you're supposed to get the little digs that occur every now and again, even the ones that are almost inaudible. But the one thing that I thought was really interesting about this lecture is that before he's kind of written a panegyric, you know, these celebrations of the hysteric. But in this lecture, the hysteric does appear as a kind of evil figure as well, you know. There is even at the end this idea of, look at the misfortune they've brought upon us, you know, in and through their own selfishness and hedonism. So you have the hysteric as an evil figure. And that also comes out in the stalemate between the doctor and the hysteric. How is the stalemate between the doctor and the hysteric resolved? Through a pact, through complicity, you know, through them saying, well, look, come on then, you know, you get to have your cozy little life here in the hospital, you know, and everything. You get to be my sidekick, my main man, my sort of assassin, you know, and I'll give you all the kind of like rewards and sumptuous existence that, you know, that function and role entails. But just play along, would you? Make me a doctor, you know. And so there's this weird kind of way in which the hysteric then becomes like a sort of, you know, not exactly Olivia, but, you know, close, you know, this kind of mastermind in the background. But as long as the doctor gets to march out like Tiberius, you know, and address the assembly as if he were really the emperor. And I just don't know what to do with that. And it seems to go against Foucault saying, you know, hooray, the hysterics, you know, but the tone doesn't seem to be there anymore.
Yeah, or almost like a leading the legions, like Little Boots.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Can I get in there? Because to me, this thing where he says like, I have to turn off the sound every time I speak, so bear with me. But yeah, to our great misfortune. I mean, maybe there is this kind of portrayal of the hysterics, not as these brave militants and as this productive force of resistance and rebellion, but as this kind of darker force somehow. But to me, this phrase just seems to foreshadow something that he at all doesn't address, or like he just leaves it there, and then you're like, but what is this misfortune? You're like, you haven't. What is it? Right? And to me, it seems. Yeah, I get more kind of intrigued by that. Where I'm at.
Yeah. But they are called functional mannequins. You know, mannequins. They are symbolically related to evil. And he does say, to our greatest misfortune, he says, to their greater pleasure, doubtless to their greater pleasure, as if like, you know, that hysteria is a form of like kind of extreme hyperbolic hedonism, basically. You know, that they're the little things I'm picking up on. Plus, earlier on, it's like the symptom as gift. You know, the hysteric gives like kind of her symptom as a gift to the doctor, almost as a form of flattery. You know. And then there's all this kind of weird talking in the doctor's head and stuff, and the ambiguity about where the voices actually sound, whose voices they actually are, and so on and so forth. So this is why I'm picking this up as something that's recurrent as a sort of motif almost throughout the closing phases of this lecture. But you're right, there's more to come, like, because the hysteric are going to play a huge role in psychoanalysis as well. I think they basically create psychoanalysis, don't they? You know? And the hysteric becomes the prototype for human psychology in general, you know, in psychoanalysis, which is then mapped onto modern culture in a way that's just almost like seamless. So weirdly enough, like the whole of modern psychology takes the hysteric as the prototype for the human, you know. So, you know, it's not a small game that's being played here, you know.
Yeah, just you know, something that I was thinking in the back of my head from a conversation that we're having, I think just last night, is that this you know, he talks about like hysteria, and then he makes this point of transference or transfer, or you know, where such that hysteria will no longer be an illness, and then, you know, of course, in a very banal way, you know, in the like contemporary domain of like, you know, feminism, it is this kind of like well, there was a certain moment at which hysteria did leave the domain of illness, and it became like a certain ascription to describe a state of woman that was a state of normality, but, you know, like a kind of exaggerated kind of like hyper state of normality, you know, where to kind of like, you know, to shut down, to silence, to, you know, so sorry, you know, to bring it to this like verbal kung fu discursive resistance kind of thing. But there was certainly like, you know, a moment in history where, yes, you know, hysteria had absolutely left the domain of illness, and it had entered in the domain of normality, but it kind of entered in there precisely to silence, you know. Shut up, you're just being hysterical. You know, to not and that speaks, I think, to like a broader conversation that, you know, me and Jakob have been having about contact, connection, tactility. You know, there's like a in leaving that domain of mental illness, it therefore entered into a kind of new game, you know, a new game of I mean, let's call it like silence and suffrage, you know, where a woman would like make demands or behave in a certain way, and then a man could, you know, could say, oh, you know, you're just being hysterical, and then that in turn became you know, reversed, and then, you know, it becomes this kind of movable object within you know, a much broader history, like outside of psychiatry, because then, you know, the weapon for a few decades at least was, you know, well, if you call me as a woman hysterical, you are a misogynist, you know, or a chauvinist. You know, like how dare you silence me? How dare you? And so it's just interesting that in this period, you know, in the 70s, he's almost, again, you know, it's almost like a prelude, right, to a number of maneuvers that will happen afterwards, in which okay, so because he is making this you know, very clear, you know, he isn't talking about male hysteria here. You know, he's talking about female hysteria. You know, I think that from at least in the archival context that he refers to, you know, he isn't talking about patients of any, you know, of like Pinel, of Charcot, of you know, whoever, Biscuit, you know, who are male. He's talking about women, and then this notion of hysteria itself becomes this kind of movable object of power, you know, where so for a certain period of time, men can use this against women to kind of like silence, to you know, to shut up, to demean, to refuse contact, to refuse, you know, like the individuality of say like a demand or you know, an expression or a volition. And then that becomes part of like a feminist reversal, in which, well, you cannot describe a woman as hysterical, because, you know, to do so is to you know, and I kind of agree with that reversal, but it's interesting how this thing it you know, in whichever way, you know, for whatever he was doing, it does take on this sense of kind of like motion and mobility, and it's you know, this notion of hysteria is like taken up at different points by different people or different groups for different reasons, but it, you know, it's still you know, it still retains it, you know, it still retains its power, let's say, you know.
Yeah, still remains massively charged even now, which is actually unusual, you know.
Yeah, but because you know, the other elements, you know, like idiot. Okay, so that's like imbecile still does have, like in the Anglo-Saxon, but you know, he's a fucking idiot. You know, it doesn't have this kind of like this charge, this power. But like, you know, to say, they're being fucking hysterical. You know, even like the way that you say it, you know, the delivery, it's there's a kind of like emphasis there. You know, they're being fucking hysterical. It's not like, he's an idiot, you know, just kind of like a throwaway, a let go. It's, you know, to accuse someone of hysteria, it has this dimension of silence, defamation, shut down, exile.
All right.
Do we have any last remarks? Maybe. I mean, we're running up on 2 hours 40. Maybe it's. I reckon we should close.
Yeah.
Somehow, lots to say still. Of course, we can return to hysteria. I feel it's like crazy rich. I mean, also just briefly how it also kind of, what you were just saying, Luke, like how it. I think when you bring it up now, it always kind of stages this dynamic of a kind of intuitive, emotional woman, always in relation to a kind of rational, cold man. I mean, somehow how this kind of folk dynamic always reemerges. I think as soon as you kind of bring it up, even if you bring it up in this way, I think, which is kind of more, if you happen to bring it up kind of in a psychoanalytical context these days, it's like, I think there is a certain rebelliousness or like a kind of there is a pride almost of bringing it up now, because you're kind of courageous, rebellious, kind of, you might be obstructive, but you are true to yourself. I think this is the kind of somehow how it. Surely there are more interpretations or uses of it. Oh wow. No, I'll finish that.
Well, should the doctors leave the clinic and have a moment of reflection in the smoking room? All right, I'll
One
stop
second.
All right.
Yeah, can I read this thing that I wrote as well?
Mhm.
It's right at the end, yeah? I don't think it works, but I'll just be annoyed if I don't read it because I wrote the fucking thing now, I was going to read it in this really weird way, and I'm going to actually do that, even though I'm not sure it's going to work at all. Okay, so. In our last expedition, our explorers were able to last on the planet of madness for 40 days and 40 nights and map the terrain like never before. They were able to take specimens from its soil and its oceans. They catalogued its flora and fauna. They dandled its lambs in their laps and learnt the songs and sadness of its birds. Some of them came back with the flowers of madness in their hair. Some of them returned looking like madmen themselves. Just as Hercules found the opening to the underworld, so did our explorers find the opening to madness. There was a river that ran straight from our homes into the heart of the maelstrom. They discovered by experiments that if you sprinkled the right drugs and said the right words, the river would drag you there against your will, drag you there kicking and screaming. Our explorers went down that river, the river of madness. They went down all along the different stages of the river of the mad. They went across the waves of well-being, buoyant and hopeful. They went into the rapids of excitement and dissociation of the self. They were pulled under by whirlpools of error, and when they came out and up for breath, a new freshness was in their lungs, a new intensity of sensation, so that no matter how fast they went, it felt like cruising, like gladness. After came the descent among the rocks, the fixed ideas, the delirious convictions, the wild currents of desire and passion and fear, until at last they were so knocked about, they saw nothing but hallucinations. Hallucinations on all sides, like a jungle closing in. Into the heart of darkness they went, to map the darkness and its heart. They took the heart of the darkness and exchanged it with their own. Such is the bravery of our explorers. They returned to fanfare and trumpets on the horses of madness to be cheered. They returned as virtuosos of madness to be listened to in grand halls. They have the voices of the mad in their throats and the movements of the mad in their nerves. They were madness translated back into sanity again. They were sanity that could speak the language of madness. Soon, they will make a guild for themselves, the guild of those who can mimic madness, who can read it like a script, those who will be called the hysterics, the seismographs of mental illness, the barometers of mental disease. These modern sibyls are those the doctors summon from the dungeons of the hospital, like mermaids of the dark, their noses as sharp as Cerberus. Now that they know the way, they can take the madman home to their madness. And who amongst us does not quiver with desire when he hears about this home? Who does not hear his own madness rise up in him and point in that direction. That will be our next expedition. The expedition to end all expeditions. The expedition to end it all. All right. I got loads of boogers all over my fingers. Anyway, I was just trying to weave together in one little speech all those things threads I've been trying to pull together. But
retire from this club and get into the smoking room.
Yeah.
Have a reflection on how the day's work in the clinic has gone.
yeah, cool.
All right.